Good evening, and thank you for attending this parent meeting at South Forsyth High School. Tonight's focus is on our RTI program and the process that your student might encounter in their 4 years at South. My name is Jill McKee, and I'll be leading you through tonight's presentation. RTI stands for Response to Intervention. At South, we have a school-wide purpose to create strong integrated system of effective instruction and interventions that will build on students' capacity to meet the rigorous standards for graduation, as well as to have continued lifelong success. RTI is just a portion of what we call our multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS. Under the MTSS umbrella lives RTI, as well as school and community collaboration, parental involvement, our curriculum design and standards, professional development, and teamwork between all members of the community, including the student, the parents, and our staff members. And also, we've now added our SOFO cell, or social and emotional learning. The goal here is to reach academic, behavior, and social emotional needs for all learners. RTI is a general education problem-solving model that is built on the early identification of students who may be in need of additional academic and behavioral supports. RTI does provide this model because of federal laws such as No Child Left Behind from 2001 and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004. Both of these emphasize the importance of providing high-quality, scientifically based instruction and interventions for all students to meet the grade level standards. Key terms that we'll need to talk about as we move through tonight's presentation are listed on the screen. We'll go through each of them briefly and then in more detail as we move through. Universal screening is something that we talk about often. It's actually a step that we take early in the school year, sometimes even before the school year begins, which helps us determine which students are at risk for not meeting grade level standards, or those that might have behavioral or emotional problems that could interfere with their learning. We have many types of universal screening options here at South and at the high school level. They actually do differ from the elementary and middle school universal screening processes. So if you're familiar with that from the other levels, you'll notice that it's a bit different here. We'll start by using students' EOC scores or other standardized test scores that they might come to us with. Additionally, we'll look at students' Lexile scores to help us determine what their possible reading levels might be and where they might struggle in terms of reading and comprehension. As we move throughout the year, we'll look at our 4.5-week grade reports to identify at-risk students. So that does include grades as well as attendance. Additionally, as we move through the year, we'll look at discipline reports to see where we might have some behavioral needs. Throughout all of this, progress monitoring is foundational. We have data teams in place in every content area to look at progress monitoring and help us determine if our interventions are working or if we might need to adjust those interventions. Speaking of interventions, we'll talk about research-proven interventions. Those are specific curriculum and educational changes that have been proven to be effective. Those might include something like differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction is simply a framework for effective teaching strategies and assessment methods that would provide all students with a range of educational opportunities for acquiring, processing, and showing their understanding. We might look at variations in content, process, and product. And finally, we'll talk about remediation a little bit as we move through this. Remediation just talks about targeted interventions that are designed to address significant learning gaps in the universal skills, and they're applied often in many different ways. One of your handouts that you received as you entered the meeting is this pyramid. Some of you might have seen this pyramid before. Oftentimes it's only shown with 3 tiers. We now have a 4-tiered model here at South, and the Georgia Department of Education provides for us. We'll talk about each of these each of these tiers a bit as we move through the presentation, but we won't spend too much time talking about the specifics of them, but more about the process of moving from one to the next. Tier 1 actually encompasses all students. Tier 1 is our standards-based classroom. We know that all students are going to participate in the general education learning. That would include the universal screening. So that includes our 4.5-week grade reports as well as attendance reports and our discipline reports for behavior. It's important to note that we're maybe not always talking about academic, but also behavioral interventions that might be needed. We'll find that the instruction is differentiated and through flexible grouping, perhaps, and multiple means of learning and demonstration of that learning. Teachers will be working in their data teams for progress monitoring and changing assessment and instructional strategies as needed. This data is continually gathered and it's analyzed by the student and the teacher to help monitor progress. Decisions made at this level are data-driven as they are with all other levels, especially the instruction that occurs in the classroom. Students are also encouraged to get involved at Tier 1 in all of the tiers. Students should be setting rigorous learning goals and tackling challenging material and experiencing a bit of productive struggle, which will help them as they cope through the rigors of high school. We'll find that we'll monitor the learning here and multiple formative assessments. Those formative assessments might include observations, conversations, and work products such as presentations. Through those practices, teachers and students might identify and address any learning gaps. If we find that a student is achieving on grade level, then they'll continue at Tier 1 instruction. However, if data and progress monitoring finds that students might not be achieving on grade level, we might then administer a universal screener, such as a CBM test, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. If through that CBM, we notice that students are not performing at or above the 25th percentile as indicated by that test, then we could compare those results with additional data to support moving students to a Tier 2. At either case, at this point, the parents would definitely be involved as they should have been earlier in the Tier 1 process or at the first signs of struggle. We'll call all parents in as well as the student, teacher, counselor, and sometimes additional staff members as needed. This then forms the IST or the instructional support team. That team will develop a plan and identify interventions that could be successful for the student. We'll monitor the progress of the student and those interventions regularly. At Tier 2, our instructional emphasis would shift from the learning of foundational skills to those skills needed to learn complex content. We'll target the intervention, which will shift from sometimes instructional and cognitive and learning strategies and skills that can be generalized to and supported in content area classes. Our targeted interventions here would support the mastery of essential grade level skills and executive functioning. We'll also look at the students' engagement, motivation, goal setting, and their post-secondary career exploration. All of our strategies are meant to support and increase these items. At Tier 2, most of our interventions and progress monitoring will occur between 6 to 12 weeks, have a length of 6 to 12 weeks. Here at South, we use the EASY CBM for progress monitoring, and we'll administer that test to the student about every 3 to 4 weeks, and we'll track and graph their progress. If we notice from 2 or more data sources that a student has a skill deficit that does seem to be impacting their achievement, we'll call an additional parent meeting or IST meeting. If we notice that the student is not showing a positive response through progress monitoring data, then we could modify and then continue to monitor another IST plan. The important method here is to try multiple interventions along with multiple data points. If we notice that the progress monitoring data is not showing a positive response, we'll come together, we'll meet again, and then we will move the student from Tier 2 to Tier 3, which is the SST. At Tiers 2 and Tier 3, you'll notice that your student might be pulled out into smaller groups. At Tier 2, we try to stay around 12 students in the group for instruction. Sometimes this is seen in our math support classes. At Tier 3, the groups become even smaller, of about 8 students, and they do receive direct instruction in addition to the instruction and interventions that we have applied at Tiers 1 and Tiers 1 and 2. These students will receive this instruction for about 4 to 5 days a week for a maximum of 12 weeks for 30 to 45 minutes at a time. Again, this is often done through our math support classes or our transition classes. Tier 3 meetings include input from all parties, the student, sometimes an administrator, a counselor, the classroom teachers, and of course you, the parents. We would look at identifying students' strengths, discuss interventions that have been positive or made a positive impact. We also want to hear about your concerns for your student at school. We'll review your child's developmental history and look for input from you through questionnaires. We will also review deeply the interventions that we have tried, and your input here is really important. If we show that your child might have delays in learning through either testing or other programs, then we may look at other assessments for special education. The important thing is that this is not a quick process, and you need to realize that data must be collected for multiple weeks, really at a minimum of 12 weeks before we can consider that an intervention is not successful. But after we see that a student is still struggling after 2 or 3 interventions have been applied and progress monitoring is supporting that the interventions are not successful, then we will see obviously a lack of progress in the student, and it might be time for us to consider moving to a referral for special education services, or special education assessment, excuse me. It's important that you note that at any point throughout this process, the parent has the right to request an evaluation for special education services at any time. Again, our hope is that through progress monitoring and the method that we use, a CBM test or curriculum-based measurement, that our students are able to move fluidly through the tiers of the RTI process. So a student who might be at Tier 2 and their 9th grade level could very easily be in their 10th grade level moved back down to a Tier 1 or even in the middle of the grade level year. So our CBMs, they are curriculum-based and they vary depending on the student's identified learning needs. Those CBMs are an easy computer-based test that is given based on the curriculum. Quite often we see that we are monitoring for math or for reading supports at the high school level. Those CBMs are identified through by the content that your student is in. So if your student is in a geometry class, then we will use a geometry CBM. If your student is struggling in a reading class, then we would use a reading comprehension CBM. Another big part of our MTS umbrella is our social and emotional learning. Each week, your student participates in pulse checks with their teachers where they have one-on-one conversations with one of their trusted teachers. This year, that is their fourth period teacher. Those teachers also lead your students through activities that are meant to engage the whole child and to work on the academic, behavior, and the social emotional needs of your student. Our SOFO cell, or social emotional learning at South, is focused on 5 skills and competencies as developed by the Castle 5 competencies. Those competencies are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. It's important to note that your role is vital to the success of your children and also vital to the success of any of the programs that we implement here at South. Parents do play a critical role in supporting what your children are learning in school. We would love for you to be involved, reinforce skills that we talk about and interventions that we talk about here at school, and celebrate the successes no matter how small. We would love for you to be attentive to this process, attend all meetings, and make sure that you're communicating clearly and early with your teacher when you notice the first sign of struggle. Additionally, we would love to keep those lines of communication open, so please reach out to your student's counselor, teacher, or grade level administrator with any questions that you might have. When you walked into this meeting, you also received this handout. This handout is helpful for looking at some parent interventions that could be applied at each of the tiers. I'll just go through a few that are definitely important at the high school level. At Tier 1, so this means every child that attends our school, it's important that you engage your student in a discussion about how his or her day was. Don't just settle for the good or it was fine. Try to ask specific questions about content. For example, what did you do in biology today? You should also monitor your child's It's Learning account and help them keep up with their homework and deadlines. Please go ahead and initiate communication at the beginning of the year with each of your child's teachers, regardless of whether they're making an A or a C in the class. If at the first signs of noticing that your child might be experiencing difficulty, please ask for a conference. Continue to praise your child for any good work or progress that they have made. It's important that the communication with your child's teacher is regular and is maintained throughout the year. We have curriculum night each year, and we would love for you to attend that to start off with a face-to-face meeting with your child. Also, throughout the year, we have school-sponsored events such as SOFOpalooza for a United South event, or any of our counselor meetings where you can come in, have coffee with the counselors, and discuss any of your school concerns. At Tier 2, we might talk to you and discuss ways that you could implement and reinforce those specific interventions and strategies that your child's teacher is using. It would be helpful if you could reinforce those at home. We may also ask that you give permission for your student to participate in some of our extended learning opportunities, including small groups or our Monday tutoring opportunities. Please, we also encourage you to share your observations that you see at home with us. and request assistance at any point from your IST or your student's instructional support team. As we go through Tier 2 and Tier 3, you'll notice that we'll ask and request many parent conferences. Again, we ask that you are attentive and that you take time to think about some questions that you might have before the meeting. At Tier 3, we often send home questionnaires. It's important that those questionnaires or checklists are complete and they're returned in a timely manner. Continue to implement and reinforce any interventions and strategies recommended by your Tier 3 SST. And at any point that you see your child's learning might be struggling or changing, please reach out to your child's SST or any of their teachers. If your student has been recommended for special education services based on an assessment, it's important that you continue all of those points at Tiers 1, 2, and 3. Reviewing of progress reports becomes an ongoing process, and it is very important that you request a meeting with your teacher or your special education team if you notice a change in their behavior or their progress. The most important part of this process is maintaining open lines of communication. Some questions that you might consider as you attend parent meetings are listed here for you. Not that these are all the questions that you can ask, nor do you have to ask all of these questions. We think it's important that you think about these and understand each of the answers to these questions. If at any point you don't understand, such as you know that your next meeting is scheduled, but you don't know perhaps what is the how often the other meetings will happen, it's important that you ask those. It's also important that you're clear about who serves on your child's team so that you know who you can reach out to when you need help or have additional questions. I have listed for you here and also on our website some additional resources you might want to read about if this is your first interaction with RTI or any of our Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 services. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to me via email or you can call the school and reach me in my office. Thank you. I hope you have a great night.